Okay. So the goal of this is to try to teach you how to build large-scale models like this one, which is a 13-foot long spaceship, the Gateway. So I'm just going to briefly go through like my portfolio of big spaceships for a quick minute, and then we'll get into the building and tips. So the Gateway took 2 years to make. It's 13 feet or 471 studs long. It's around 150,000 parts. And for the lights in the front and in the command bridge there in the back, I used LED strip lighting. And for this big spaceship, it splits apart in about 9 main sections, which sections are going to be very important. So I'm going to be touching on those pretty heavily later. And then this one was nominated for Best Youth Creation because I was 17 when I made this at the time at my first ever convention, Brickworld, Chicago, 2018. And after that, I was able to become part of WisLUG. So my next big giant ship is the Voyager's Keep. And this one initially took 1 year to make. And at Brickworld Chicago last year, I had some unfortunate catastrophes with the middle section of it. And that caused me to have to tear things back down and completely rebuild it. So that added another 6 months to that due to modifying it. And this one is 7 feet long, or 266 studs, or 75,000 parts roughly. And no, I do not count each piece as I place them down. That would be insanely difficult to keep track of. And this one has 7 main sections, and this time I used custom LEDs for lighting. And this is my most recent spaceship, the Aggressor. And this one was built for a contest called Shiptember, which is where you build a giant ship in 1 month. And this one's just a little over 3 feet, almost 4 feet long. And I don't quite have an estimate of a part count on this one yet, though I'm thinking it's definitely less than 30,000. And the LEDs are going to be coming soon for this one. And for this, I do plan to make it actually drive around the convention center, which that one is coming soon as well. And then this one is still a work in progress. As you can see, I have the top part of it to finish yet, but so far this is going to be about 6 feet long. And this one was started right away after last year's Chicago convention. And I'm hoping to have this done roughly within a month. And this one as well will be able to drive itself around the convention, which is just crazy for such a big model like this. So I'm going to go into some of the challenges of doing that with some of the structural elements in this presentation as well. So the topics I'm going to cover, well, first of all, what is a spaceship? After all seeing those wonderful models I've made, hopefully you have some idea of that. And then we'll be going into planning a big mock and the sections which are really key. Then we'll go into structure and examples, displaying large creations and how you present them. Transportation, of course, is just always a huge task for anything big, especially spaceships. And then how to store them as well. And then we'll go down through the setup and teardown process at all the different LEGO shows that I take them to. The repair process, because big builds like this, they never go perfect. Well, at least I want them to, but oftentimes they don't, because there are so many different things to consider when building at a large scale versus something small. So sometimes they do break, and I'm going to go through what I do as my process to repair that. And then at the end, I'll be walking through all but one of my giant spaceships. So, what is a spaceship? And SHIP is an acronym for seriously huge investment in parts. And this, what classifies as a ship is set by a long time ago, the standard for the September contest, which I'll get into in a minute, that is at least 100 Lego studs long in any orientation. So it can be 100 studs long, 100 studs tall, 100 studs diagonally if you really wanted to, and go overachiever route. And one thing I will say is you will need a lot more parts than you think you will. Even if you think you got enough parts, you'll probably be thinking 2 or 3 more times again on that one. And ships are very expensive in terms of how much time you have to put into them to engineer them correctly, to be able to take them to shows successfully. And then, of course, the parts. And the one thing is that building big is a very long process and can be very daunting when you first start any large-scale project. So I just want to say, once you have the final product, it is most definitely worth the effort that you put in once you see your vision come to life in our favorite plastic bricks. And of course, they take up a ton of space to build and store. And off to the left here, I have 2 of my giant spaceships that I'm currently working on. And both of them happen to be in my bedroom. And when I have bins all over the floor, and they're on the walls all surrounding this as well, when trying to get like build space or trying to lay down to put parts under the ship, because sometimes you have to do that as well, like space is very, very tight. So just know that they take up a lot of space. And as for the September that I mentioned a couple times before, it's an annual spaceship building contest held in, you guessed it, September. So that is basics of what is a spaceship. Is there any questions anybody has at this point?
There's nothing in the chat right now, but if anyone does have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll ask them for you.
All right, so the first part is we're going to go into planning such a large build. And like I said before, like starting these big projects can be very daunting, and like you're very afraid of actually starting it. But if you just break it down into smaller parts, it's going to be much more easier for you to be able to complete a project like this. So off to the left here, I have a picture of just a basic sketch of what I was kind of envisioning for building a spaceship. And this is actually the original sketch of my 6-foot long ship that I'm working on, the Alien Cruiser. And this is here to show and how planning is essential by having sections in your builds, and how sometimes these sections can be a little bit difficult. And so what I do to brainstorm sections is, like, what features does your model have? So like on the interior, like what would the rooms be? So like, for example, you can have a barracks, you can have a hallway, you can have a shield generator. If you're getting inspiration from like Star Wars or something like that, you can have a command center, the engines area. There's so many more different things that can be on the interior, but that's just to list a few. And then like what's mainly on the external side of the ship. So like you have your main engines, your like different viewports, like your windows, like so the pilots can actually see out of the ship. You have your laser cannons, obviously, because those are always a cool part of spaceships. It's like, ooh, what kind of different laser cannon design can I incorporate this time? Or anything like communication antennas as well. All these different features kind of like define your different sections that you have in your ship. And what I mean by sections is that this entire big build has to split apart eventually once you build it, so that when you want to actually take it somewhere, you can actually do so without having to lift the entire like 13-foot long spaceship out of a standard door, which will never work. So more on planning here. So besides just the internal and external features to get the sections, I like to also brainstorm just like a general shape for the ship as a whole. And many examples of this are out there. If you could just look like at any spaceship and you like draw like the outlines of that shape, that's kind of what you're gonna go for in your sketch, just for the shape. And again, the basic sketch shows out on the left, showing like a very smooth shaped style ship and not entirely geometric. So just like having that visual for yourself to keep on track during the whole process of building definitely does help, as besides building the ship, there are other things to do in life too. So it'll always keep you straight to what you originally planned on doing. And on just below that on the right, I have a picture of my work in progress ship right now. And you can kind of see that I stuck to it, the original sketch, very well. Though one main difference I did make is that the middle, I made it a little bit taller in proportion to the engines, just so it get a little more mass to the ship, I decided, for the shape. But those are creative decisions that you can make after you kind of like see the physical build from your sketch. So when you have that general shape and your sections planned, now you can kind of think how the ship can be displayed. And obviously something like this, if you just try to set it on the table, it's probably going to fall apart on you. So to have a better display, you need different stands for it. And those stands are very critical to how you build your structure in terms of your layout and your sections. And within the structure, of course, the stands need to be kind of like slotted in there, so it kind of like locks the ship in place as it's being set down. And the way I imagine where stand locations are is, say like I have a separate section of just the engines on its own. How can that sit by itself when like placing different stands to kind of put it by itself? And once you have each individual section, you can then combine everything together into a nice and sturdy display. But having like each section balanced on its own with its separate stands is pretty important, especially as you're taking it apart in sections to transport it as well, so that you can set one piece down and then connect the next without having to worry about one of them falling apart. So for stands, how I do them is you want a really wide base. The column, for like my ships, I don't really go any less than 8 studs wide. And at the top, it obviously should be wider as well, so it connects to more of the ship, and having those wider areas gets a nice balance for when you try to assemble your sections, and so that's not very wobbly at all. And the reason why the column is so thin is because the weight is only transferred straight down on it. It's not at an angle to where the column would need to be thicker. And one thing to also note about the stands is that they should be solid and not have any gaps, because there's so much weight in these builds that if you have like many gaps in there, or it's just too small of a stand, it's just naturally going to want to collapse. Or you might have parts breaking in the future, though it might hold for now, it might not last long. So making sure it's solid and thick enough is definitely key. And over on the left, I have an example of the stand that I use for the Gateway and the Voyage's Keep, both of my two biggest spaceships. And one thing to note too is on my stands, I have a label on them, just with simple masking tape, and I wrote a number down on it. And I took a picture of that, so when you're looking at a layout of your ship, you know which stand goes where. Because at some spaces in the ship, your stands might sit a little higher or a little lower inside. So labeling them and having a picture of their locations is always nice, so you don't have the stress when you're setting up the ship, which we'll get into a little bit later. And I guess the last thing I'll touch on with the stands here is that the wide top and bottom bases, they help distribute that weight down the center column there. So now we're going to move on to the structure of the spaceship. So now after we've touched on the stands, which have to hold up that weight, but what's actually inside of the ship to put the stand into. So, of course, the structure is especially important, as with any other MOCs. So when you touch it, it doesn't fall apart. And on the left there, I included a picture of myself repairing the Voyage's Keep at Brickworld, Chicago in 2019 last year. And this was actually fully collapsed on the top there in the roof, and I had to fix the entire bottom frame because I just made a mistake of making it a little bit too thin, which I do have some structure examples as we go on that are successful and not successful, and I'll have reasons why those work or not. And for the structure, it should be very thick, as you can see just how much mass just that middle section there has in comparison to me sitting there. It's almost the size of my entire chest, or like at least half of my body, so it's naturally going to have a lot of weight. And one thing too I did find is you don't want to underestimate the small little greeblings or any of the little details you put in, as across like a big area, as these are massive, of course, it adds a good amount of mass. And of course, the underside of the structure and the top side are pushing down with gravity, so you really want to make sure that's thick so that it doesn't collapse. So on the left there of more structure, I included what I originally had done for the Gateway. I think these pictures are back from 2017, actually. Yeah, 2017. And you can see in here, I am starting out the structure. This one, you can see some Technic bricks as like kind of aligning a border to a section there. In this case, it was the hallway. So I just kind of put a couple of minifigs in there, just kind of fill up space to give me that idea. And I guess some examples that I use that work well is going to be a Technic brick and plate sandwich. And don't try to eat it because it's a little bit too hard. And then using Technic brick and plate sandwich with the Technic lift arms is even better yet. And one example that's not going to be the best, which will be in the next couple slides here, and oftentimes barely sufficient, is just a big plate and this filler brick. It simply, in big structures like this, it tends to not really work because you get a lot more flex in it. And as well as it's not really clamped together that well, it'll tend to kind of like pop off. So here's one of the examples of the better structures that I've used, which is the Technic brick and plate sandwich. And you can see on there, I use the 6x8 Technic bricks, as they're very, very sturdy and yet can connect in all different directions. So you can expand horizontally, or you can expand vertically, or even diagonally if you get creative with certain Technic bricks and Technic lift arms. So in here I have different layers of Technic bricks clamped together with the plates and the lift arms there. And that the plates actually don't have as much of a gap as a brick, so it's actually a lot more solid than you would think, at least at first glance. It does really do very well, as I've used it in both the Voyage's Keep throughout the entire thing and the Alien Cruiser, my work in progress one. And I could put also the model files for these structures in the chat if anybody wants me to do that. Just let me know. And for the next structure, I have my work in progress picture of my newest ship, my almost 4 foot long, the Aggressor. And you can see here that the structure is entirely vertical on top of the engine, which that alone is very, very kind of scary just to look at for a minute, but it really does hold together very well in that position. And on the picture more to the right side, I have like a very big close-up of that structure. So it's again using that Technic brick and plate sandwich kind of technique, I'm calling it. But then in the middle, I'm using the lift arms to expand it sideways and actually in an odd dimension. So this structure gets like very, very tricky to work with. But this can also be expanded horizontally and vertically in many different sizes and shapes of whatever spaceship you might build. So these are the two like best structures that I have found that really work for my big spaceships. And again, now for the one that doesn't work so well, that is just simply having a big plate and then just bricks on the inside. They'll tend to kind of like pop off, like I mentioned before, over long-term use. And this is actually the original structure I used in the gateway throughout the entire thing. And as I got to very larger sections, like in the front, for example, it really started not to fare too well just because of the flex in it for being so wide. And so far it's still holding up, but I can definitely see the wear in it. So the Technic brick structures are definitely a lot better than this. And then like for anything like for a lot of weight on it, this typically is not the best technique, at least in terms of putting it on a stand and for like a big ship up high. So now we're going to go into more of the transportation and storage of spaceships, in which again, sections are very, very important. And at the scale that I've been working in for a while, you can't just simply carry your whole build out the door. I mean, that'd be my dream to actually be able to do that, but any door is not nearly big enough. So what I do with those sections that we make, I build custom wooden crates for those, or custom containers. So instead of having to fit your sections within a fixed size of a storage tote from like a Rubbermaid or any of the Sterilite containers, having that freedom of size really helps you a lot to transport things. And at least, yeah, for this application, I find that the wood crates are the best. And with on the inside of those, I have posts or a place where stands go up. And I have lots of padding in them, like bubble wrap and blankets or any other kind of like padding material that you can put in there. I've put in there. And the fact that it's wood compared to some of the other totes that you can get is that the wood is very thick and can actually support the weight of a big ship of the size that I'm building. And the picture on the bottom there is the crates that I've used for the gateway to store each of its 9 main sections. And you can also notice that they're on milk crates, just so they're not touching the ground, especially like during winter and things like that. I find that really helps for long-term storage. And then finishing off the spaceship present transportation, this is me at Brickworld Chicago 2018, and with all of my crates there and everything in one piece successfully. And I just kind of find it weird that the convention hall was just so empty, because I was like literally one of the first ones to set up. And I really cannot wait till an actual in-person convention to show off our cool Lego creations.
Same here. Same here.
And so now we'll go kind of into the setup and teardown process. And like after you make your wooden crates and you find means of fitting that much of your big build in a vehicle, which is often a challenge. For this one, the gateway, I ended up doing a cargo van and packing 2 of our cars full. And they almost had no space getting here and back from Brickworld 2018. But it worked. It fit all the wooden crates in there. And you just want to be careful when you get them out, because on the road, you know, there is quite a few bumps, hills, or sharp turns. And that means just packing things very well is essential to, even if you have your structure and everything, some of those bumps may pop off some of the looser details or panels that you might have on there. So really making sure it's padded up nice and tight, that the structure is strong in the box is something that's essential. I just very carefully unpackage your padding materials in there, and typically you'll need at least another person or 2 to help you get it out, because I certainly have with how big my sections are. And it's definitely a process, at least for the gateway, to get it up on its stands. This is my first ever big build. And something I mentioned before, as you can see me assembling the gateway below, is that all the stands that I have on there, you can barely make it out, but you can see that I have labels on there, just numbering them, and I was able to put them in the right place when assembling it. And just naturally raising them up, the sections on these stands is a challenge to make sure that you don't tip it over as you lift it up. And when you're doing this, don't stress. As long as you planned it out correctly, your build will definitely come together and you'll definitely enjoy it. So this is where I didn't quite finish my slides, but I have everything written down here. So if your spaceship breaks, and which did at Brickworld Chicago in 2019. I'm just trying to find that picture in my previous slides here. Yep. So it doesn't, sometimes ships break and they can end up with you repairing it for days on end, like I was at Brickworld last year. It can be quite not motivating that you spent all that time and effort to put in all the work to make that big spaceship, and unfortunately it fell apart. So what I do is first, especially because this whole thing came apart on me and I had to rebuild almost the entire middle section, which is about half of the ship, in just a few days before the convention. At first, I really just wanted to race and get this done, and as all the pressure was on, I was at the event. There's hundreds of people around to see my big epic Lego creation that I made over the past year, and that it's not in one piece. It's very stressing. So first I just had to kind of like calm down and just kind of walk away from it actually for a little bit. And a couple of WisLUG members helped me with that for sure. And that was definitely a big help. And one of the things is Lego can be built into something, can get torn down, but it also can be rebuilt. So there's always going to be the way to fix it. Then you just kind of have to assess your weak points and kind of replay how that situation happened to your big model to be able to repair it. And what I at least do is I won't fix like the big things right away, because those things take a lot of time. And when you're not seeing progress, that like kind of doesn't make you want to keep going with it, because you're not going to think you're going to finish. So like I'll start on like some of the smaller details, like the laser cannons or the antennas or some of the greebling actually, just to get progress going. And then I'll kind of work my way into the major issue that happened, just to get through it a little bit easier. And obviously I've learned the hard way multiple times actually, which is unfortunate, but with the Voyager's Keep, of course, the middle section on the gateway, actually, if I can go back. So here's the gateway. You can kind of see toward the back of the photo where kind of like the hangar bay is, where I have the translite blue door on the side. The whole area collapsed on there, and I had to rebuild that in entirety multiple times actually to get it just right. And then also over time, the back area of the engines, it kept kind of going down and kept barely connecting on there. And I tried fixing it a couple of times, and eventually, just because of the way I angled it, it ended up falling down a little bit, so I had to repair that as well. So there are going to be times when you're going to be very successful and have a very cool model like this, and sometimes they break, and it's just a lesson you have to learn for your next big spaceship, and you can then incorporate it into its repairs. So this is in the slideshow portion of this here, and I'm gonna go to the display of my 3 big spaceships.
Hey, we haven't had any questions or comments in the chat, except for Adam, who says, "I love Legos," a statement I'm sure we can all agree with here.
Yeah.
If anyone else has any questions or comments about the spaceships, please pop them in the chat and I'll make sure Jordan gets them. But I have a question for you in the meantime. How do
Sure.
you come up with the names for your spaceships?
So for the gateway, if I can share my screen again here. This was my first ever convention. And so this big build was like essentially getting my foot in the door in the Lego community. So it was the gateway to the Lego community for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love it.
And then also the fact that it's a spaceship, and in the front of it's actually just a big cannon, not an engine. So don't be deceived. It'll blow up a hole through the enemy fleet and open the gate to the way to where it's going. So kind of a double meaning on that one.
That's
first one's
excellent.
definitely the primary one.
All right, we got another question from Aiden. How do you plan out the builds for your spaceships?
So for the planning of my builds, I'll typically plan out what rooms there are inside of the ship. Like for this one, I have the cannon in the front, I have the shield generator right behind it, and then I kind of have a very long hangar and stuff in there. So those kind of defined each of my sections to the ship. And then I put all those together to make this. And then for a shape, I just for this one, I kind of did it freeform as I went until about a year in, then I sketched out the whole thing. So sometimes it takes a little time to get the entire shape that you want for the ship. As for this one, it was mostly freeform that I just went and built right away and kind of saw what I liked and didn't like. So I guess in short, that's how I plan my builds. Otherwise, sometimes I'll make a very basic sketch once I figure out what rooms and what shape that I kind of want.
Neat.
All right, somebody got kicked out earlier. My second camera got kicked out too.
All right.
Let me just get back to my second camera. Be 1 second, and then we'll begin the tour of my spaceships.
Cool. Can't wait. Well, we can kind of see one of them behind you. That's the gateway, right?
No, this is the Voyager's Keep.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Don't worry. They're all big black spaceships, so it's easy to get them kind of confused if you're out of far. We're gonna go.
As a wise man once said, spaceship, spaceship, spaceship.
Yes, Benny. The wisest of them all. And there's the linker. There we go. Yeah, to fix the audio. And all right, is the audio good?
Yep, we can hear you.
No echoing?
No echoing.
Perfect. So let me pin my screen here.
Mm-hmm.
then
Well, we can see you now, but we can't hear you anymore.
how about now?
Okay, now.
Now that I just flip this around here. There we go.
Hey, we have a question from Andrew. Do you place a limit on how large you allow yourself to build?
Oh, there we go. I typically don't place a limit on how large I want to build, because I just want to kind of go as where my mind wants to take me as I get inspiration from many other things. I just don't want to limit it. So like no matter how long it'll take to do, I'll figure out a way and manage however big or small a project is. So what I'm showing is the Voyager Skeet, a 7-foot long spaceship. And this is, I think, still one of my favorites actually, just due to the engine design in the back, which is all these big bright red engines, and everything in here has LEDs in them, so these will really glow very bright at night or during World of Lights when eventually we get in-person conventions again. So I guess we'll start off by turning on the LEDs here so you can see those. Now in the daylight it's a little harder to see, but you can kind of see in here. You see,
Yeah,
if
we
I
can
can
see
turn
that.
the lights off here. You can see it a little better now. This is one of my favorite parts with the LEDs. So these I used some ratcheting 1x4 bricks to make the circles form, and then they kind of made them into a dome shape. So you can kind of see the angle here by just stacking the bricks a little bit at using some slopes. And then this whole ship also has an interior as well. So like I planned out all these different rooms. So like on the inside of here, I have like the engine room. So like all the reactors for the engines. I ended up storing the battery pack actually right behind the engine. And I was able to build the reactor right in front. Let me see if I can get the camera in there. So you can kind of see the reactor in there. And then I have a few different hallways leading to the wings. And then I have some troops guarding the area to make sure no intruders are getting in there. And then
Very
in the
important.
top left there, I have some laser cannons for security.
A secure engine room is a happy engine room.
Yep. And then as well, you can see the LED lights shining up from the ceiling there. So you can see the translate blue light coming down from them.
Are these just regular LED lights, or are they special LED lights for Lego?
These ones are just like standard 3mm lights. They fit within Technic bricks very well. And I just ended up wiring a bunch of those myself with a little bit of my dad's help as well, so I can learn soldering. So that's how I learned it. Carefully take it out as I don't break anything. So as this is the panel that I can take out on both sides, so they can see it this way. This is what my panel looks like that I got this window out of to reach your hand in there and actually play with the minifigs. And then on the inside of it, I did also greeble it with some of the weight bars or skateboard wheels. guess we kind of go back to the outside for a minute before we get to the wings. We have lots of laser cannons here. We have the command bridge up on the top there with lots of the antennas and laser cannons. And this as well has an interior. So if I can just take off this little roof here, it's a very simple panel that connects just with a couple of studs. And just like that, we have the command bridge with the crew in there planning out wherever they're going. I have the lights in there shining on the hologram table and the computer there. And then we have some troops guarding the area as well. And then toward the back, there's a little elevator that these troops can go up and down. So in the ship, throughout the interior, at whatever height it was, I wanted to make sure that a minifigure could access the entire ship. And then as we kind of move back down from the command bridge, we have the wing areas. So these open up in a couple ways. So I have a panel that opens up at the top where I have my laser cannons there. And you can see more of the engine reactor room and some of the greebling and some of the hallways on the inside there. And then this panel here opens up as well. It's just connected with some Technic axles and locked in with ball joints. So this just kind of pops out. So be careful. There we go. So now this is all opened up. You can kind of see now that I've opened it, some of the interior there behind the engine, more showing those ratchet joints and the mess of LEDs going into the engines to make them nice and beautiful on the outside. But yep, you can easily get your entire hand in here and play with all the minifigs, which is one of the goals that I kind of make on myself to build minifigure scale ships. And then right next to it, I decided to do an escape pod room, which is probably better to show on the other side. But this is what it's like empty. And I have like a little lever on the inside here to launch out the escape pod. So if you go back over here, if I turn the light on here, you can see this is the panel that originally covers the escape pod area. This is disabled to fly off as the pod goes out. And this is what they look like. So they have like their own little viewport, their own engines. And this opens up for the interior there with all the seats in there for up to 5 space troops. And then the engine area does open up as the engines face on the inside of the ship so that the troops can also get in there. Yeah, and then on the other side, I'll put this in because it's already open. Just hard holding the camera at the same time. I'm trying to demonstrate. But you can see that rests just right on top of that lever. And then below here, if I lift out one of these panels, you can kind of see a lever there. I'm going to catch the escape pod as I do it. And then the escape pod does come out there.
That's
I
really
just
cool.
don't want to drop it right now.
That's really cool.
And then right next to that too, I have the boarding shaft area. I have it out right now, so you'll be able to see it when it's empty. You have a nice corridor down the way, and there's an escape pod on the other side as well. And then there's yet another ramp in the middle there, which is actually this one, which has my entire army of space troops on it. Well, I shouldn't say my entire army, but a good portion.
Just a warning, you got 5 minutes left.
Oh. Well, I guess I should probably wrap up this ship.
and go on to the next one. But yeah, this is part of the Voyage's Keep there I went through.
Nice.
So we have the front cover here. And inside barracks too.
It's really cool you incorporated all these play features, even though most of the time it's just for display.
Is at least with my ships, I at least always want to actually play with it, because one of the original inspirations for it was me and my friend used to always kind of like have like our own like mini movies, and we'd be playing with our different vehicles and characters, and we just really wanted to actually play with some of their bigger models. So I decided to build Giant and just have a lot of fun with it.
Well, go big or go home.
I guess
You have
so.
certainly gone big.
Okay, and now we'll be right back in about 20 seconds as I go upstairs to the other room. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
No questions in the chat right now, but
Don't
again,
have
feel
too
free to
long.
post them.
So
Ooh.
here's where I have my building room. So I have two giant spaceships here. The work in progress one in the front, and the more or less finished one there in the back. So this is the one I finished for September, the Aggressor, in which here I have the cockpit easily removable. And then you can just kind of grab your pilot out of there, out of the seat, by just kind of rolling him out of the droid arm hinge there. And then actually another feature that I built into this is that the top panels lift up, and on the inside there's a gear. So I can actually lift up these wings.
That's really cool.
And I kind of got that inspiration from the Star Wars Hammerhead Corvette. Like in the beginning of New Hope, where they had the Tantive 4 chasing by the Star Destroyer. That's the kind of ship I got inspiration from that from. You have obviously laser cannons on here. More laser cannons. Some antennas. Some tractor beams on the side of the ship here. And then all these panels do open up for the interior as well. And I just had to be careful because this is actually only sitting on pick-a-brick cups right now. So pretty scary if I bump it, which has happened once. And I had to repair it this week, right before the show. So on the inside there, I have some greebling on the walls. And then you can kind of see some of the robots in here being ambushed by one of my space trippers in there. Now I can lift this panel entirely off, but because it's on pick-a-brick cups right now, I don't want to risk tipping it over actually by taking this off. So hopefully you don't mind, as I already repaired it once. But then you have another panel over here. It's the same thing on the other side and on the bottom. All these open the same way. So you're able to get your hand in there and kind of play with the minifigs. And then we have the most complicated part of this ship, the engine. Which there's actually 15 segments, which for Lego is extremely difficult, as the angles typically don't line up. And it's a lot of experimenting this to even get something somewhat functional.
All right, we're at 1 o'clock now, so I can probably wrap it up with the engine. If that's okay.
Yeah. And I guess I'll briefly show this one and its engines. There's this alien cruiser with my 6-foot-long spaceship.
Nice.
And I guess if you want to check out my further progress that I have on this, you can check me out on YouTube for Way of the Brick.